Wiltshire, England, July 17th, 1992, 13 a.m. On the grainy monochrome screen of a monitor, golden fields of ripe wheat sway under the indifferent infrared gaze. Silence. Only the wind and the crackling of static in the ether. Inside a mobile command post, camouflaged as a cattle van, a tense silence reigns. It is the culmination of Operation Blackbird, a joint, though unofficial, mission of the British Army and a group of civilian researchers. The objective? To catch the crop circle makers in the act. In the operator's headset, the calm voice of an observer on a nearby hill reports, "Alpha post, all clear. Thermal sensors show nothing larger than a fox." Before we dive into the main content, could we ask for a small favor? A like and your subscription would mean the world to us. Thank you so much. But suddenly, the stillness is pierced by the high-pitched, agitated voice of a technician sitting at a console of equipment. There's a spike, a sudden jump on the broadband magnetometer. "Klaus, what are those readings?" A second technician, leaning over an oscilloscope, replies with a perplexity that seeps through his German accent. "It's microwaves, but the temperature is stable." This is physically impossible. There's no heat source. Physically impossible. There's no heat source. On the main screen, right in the center of the observed field, something unthinkable begins to happen. It's not a light visible to the eye. It's an explosion of energy that makes the equipment scream. The wheat stalks don't break or crush. They begin to lie down. Gently, obediently, as if under the action of an invisible hand, swirling in perfect spirals. The movement is fluid, organic, hypnotic. The first observer shouts into the radio, his voice cracking with shock. "I see movement. My God, them." They're simply lying down. There's no one there. Absolutely no one there. The monitor technician zooms in. The pattern forms with incredible speed. It's not a simple circle. It's a complex pictogram composed of dozens of elements. The process lasts exactly 96 seconds, and then, as abruptly as it began, it all stops. The magnetometer returns to background values. The field is still again, but it's different now. A message is imprinted on it. Klaus's voice, in the silence of the command post, sounds like a verdict. He didn't just lay the stems down, he altered them at a cellular level. Look at the modulation. This looks like code. Good heavens, he's writing. He's writing in binary code. This recording was never officially released. Its existence is denied by the UK Ministry of Defence. The project it was part of, Operation Blackbird, was publicly declared a complete failure, a fruitless and costly hunt for pranksters with boards and ropes. But those few dozen seconds of grainy film tell a completely different story. They suggest that for decades, while the world was fed a convenient lie, someone or something was holding a dialogue in the language of geometry, physics, and mathematics, using the fields of England as a giant blackboard. And the greatest mystery is not who was sending these messages, but why our own governments took such extraordinary measures to ensure we never tried to read them. This is not another UFO story. It is an investigation into a global cover-up, a journey into the world of anomalous science, government disinformation, and the chilling testimonies of witnesses who dared to speak out. We will trace the evidence, from the microscopic structure of a deformed wheat stalk to the dark corridors of military intelligence. Because the truth about crop circles does not point to distant stars, but to a conspiracy of silence here on Earth. And the question we must ask is, what is hidden in plain sight? So vast and so important that concealing it required a global campaign of ridicule and deception. Before we delve into the labyrinth of modern scientific controversies, conspiracy theories, and government disinformation, we need to take a trip back in time, way back. Because the earliest known documented evidence of this phenomenon didn't appear in the 20th century with its flying saucers and mass culture. It was printed on large paper in 1678. A small English pamphlet, or leaflet, with the grandiose title, "The Reaping Demon," or "Strange News from Hertfordshire." In a primitive but expressive engraving, a horned demon with a scythe is depicted methodically and maliciously reaping a field of oats, leaving behind perfectly uniform circles. The accompanying text narrates the story tells of a wealthy but stingy farmer who couldn't agree on a price with a worker hired to harvest his field. Enraged, the farmer shouted that he'd rather let the devil himself harvest his crop than pay such a price. According to the pamphlet, that very night neighbors saw a strange and inexplicable light above his field, and the next morning all the oats were arranged in neat circles. Arranged, not harvested. And so uniformly and precisely that no mortal could have done such a thing. For centuries, this story was considered little more than local folklore, a moralizing fable about the dangers of greed and blasphemy. However, for modern researchers of anomalous phenomena, this ancient document is not just a tale, but proof number one, a historical precedent. It irrefutably demonstrates that the phenomenon was not a product of the media age and UFO fever. Scattered reports of strange patterns in fields, though rare, continued to appear in European chronicles throughout the 11th and 19th centuries. They were few and far between, ignored, considered curiosities, or the result of rare meteorological phenomena. But they existed, laying the historical groundwork for the drama that would unfold in our time. And the astonishing concentration of modern crop circles, precisely in Wiltshire, at the heart of the sacred geography of ancient Britain, forced researchers to ask an extremely uncomfortable question. Isn't what we observe today a modern manifestation of something much older? Did the people who erected gigantic megalithic structures here thousands of years ago know of the same force that today draws complex fractals in the fields? Was it pure coincidence that the patterns appeared in places of power, or was it a conscious and deliberate choice? With each new and more complex formation, the answer became ever clearer. It was not a coincidence. Behind it all was an intelligence. Like all great mysteries, this one began deceptively simply, with an ordinary farmer, an ordinary field, and an unusual sunrise that brought with it something impossible. For decades, perfect impressions appeared with the first glimmers of dawn on the golden canvas of ripe grain. At first they were primitive shapes, mostly single circles, too regular to be the result of weather anomalies like tornadoes, yet too massive and flawless to be the work of vandals. Locals in pubs shrugged, attributing it all to eccentric natural phenomena, rare ball lightning or unexplored plasma vortices. Natural vortices, however, don't carry a compass and ruler. They aren't capable of creating perfect Euclidean geometry. But with each new season, with each passing year, the patterns grew more complex. They evolved. The simple circles gave way to elegant spirals. Then rings, straight lines, triplets, and quintuples appeared, arranged with astronomical precision. In the late 1980s, the phenomenon experienced a veritable explosion. Its epicenter was southern England, and its heartland, the county of Wiltshire. This is an ancient land, steeped in mysticism and history, where the shadows of millennia-old megaliths like Stonehenge and Avebury fall upon these very fields. Silbury Hill, the largest prehistoric man-made mound in Europe, silently watched as this modern mystery unfolded beside it. It seemed as if these ancient stone guardians were attracting the nocturnal creations. The first to grasp the true scale of what was happening were the pilots of light aircraft and hang gliders. From a height of several hundred meters, it was clear these were not random patterns. They were gigantic, deliberate compositions, some of which exceeded the area of a football field. They displayed radial symmetry, fractal precision, and mathematical proportions that would be a Herculean task to reproduce, even with modern technologies like GPS and laser levels. But the most important and chilling detail was the total absence of any trace, not a single shoe print, not the slightest rut from a vehicle driving to or from the formation. None of the local residents, whose houses sometimes overlooked the fields, had ever seen or heard anything. They simply appeared in the interval between sunset and sunrise, as if the earth itself silently exhaled them onto its surface. Questions arose in a torrent, faster than any answers. Who? How? With what technology? And the main existential question, why? The world was fascinated, but when a miracle occurs, there are always those who seek to discredit it. The skeptics were quick to arrive, and their explanations were simple, understandable, and, at first glance, logical. By the summer of 1991, public opinion, weary of mysteries, demanded a simple and clear answer. The enigma had become too big, too much debated, transforming from a local curiosity into a global phenomenon. And the media got what they so passionately desired. Two elderly gentlemen, Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley, came forward. With charming smiles and a pint of beer in hand, they confessed everything. Their story was simple, down to earth, and therefore brilliant. For more than a decade, they claimed, they had sneaked into farmers' fields under cover of night, armed only with primitive tools, a 5-foot wooden board, a coil of rope, and a cap with a wire sight to keep the lines straight. Their motive? A simple prank, a desire to mock ufologists and see how far it would go. They enthusiastically demonstrated their simple technique before dozens of television cameras, easily and skillfully flattening simple but neat circles. Newspapers burst with triumphant headlines. The mystery of crop circles solved. Two cheerful retirees fool the whole world. The scientific community, long embarrassed by this phenomenon and reluctant to tarnish its reputation, sighed with collective relief. Skeptics celebrated. The entire years-long saga was officially declared the clearest example of mass hysteria, credulity, and the power of the media. Case closed. But beneath the glittering surface of this convenient story, enormous holes were hidden. Bauer and Chorley's demonstration was convincing, but only partially. It perfectly explained how to make primitive rings or simple pictograms, but it didn't explain at all the extreme elegance, mathematical precision, and gigantic scale of the more complex formations. Their confession failed to explain how gigantic compositions, consisting of hundreds of individual elements with perfect symmetry and stretching for hundreds of meters, were created. It didn't account for mathematical constants like pi or the golden ratio, encoded in the proportions of many patterns. Some formations were so complex that they accurately represented Fibonacci sequences, binary code, and even graphic projections of four-dimensional mathematical objects like the tesseract, concepts infinitely beyond the capabilities of two prankster old men working in the dark by flashlight. Moreover, when meticulous journalists and researchers began asking follow-up questions, Bauer and Chorley became noticeably confused in their testimonies. They couldn't recall the exact dates and locations of the creation of many of the more complex formations they so readily claimed authorship of. In an interview, they admitted they had been inspired by earlier crop circles they had seen in newspapers, which directly indicated they weren't the creators of the phenomenon, but simply its most successful imitators, jumping on a bandwagon already in motion. They couldn't provide a coherent explanation for why forensic investigators never found a single trace of their presence at the sites of the most complex formations. Nor could they explain how some formations appeared in protected areas belonging to the Ministry of Defense, under 24-hour surveillance, or even in no-fly zones. Their confession was the perfect solution for the press, allowing them to elegantly close the case and move on to the next story. The story disappeared from the front pages, but for the researchers, who had scientific data at their disposal, who had personally been in the middle of fields where compass needles spun uncontrollably and plants showed signs of strange internal trauma, the hoax explanation didn't withstand the slightest scrutiny. It soon became clear that the overwhelming majority of the circles, up to 99% according to some estimates, were in fact man-made. Imitators, artists, pranksters, but not all. There remained that 1%, a small but stubborn handful of formations that defied logic and demonstrated physical properties beyond our known science. And it was in that 1%, as is often the case, that the real, uncomfortable truth was hidden. While the mainstream media celebrated the exposure of the great hoax and society turned its attention to other sensations, a true scientific drama unfolded in the silence of university and private laboratories. Several independent and courageous scientists, mostly botanists, biophysicists, and soil scientists, refused to ignore the physical evidence that lay literally before them. Their feet were in the anomalous circles, and the first and most astonishing clue was found within the plants themselves, specifically at their nodes, those small but critical joints that connect the stem segments and are responsible for their vertical growth. What they discovered under the microscope was astonishing and had no analogs in known botany. In the formations that appeared on an unwitnessed night, the plant stems were not broken, crushed, or damaged, as would inevitably have occurred with any mechanical impact, be it a board, a garden roller, or anything else. Instead, they were gently bent at precise angles, as if they had been momentarily softened from within, allowing them to lie still without dying. At some nodes, so-called ejection cavities were observed, microscopic openings, as if they had been pierced from the inside out by a powerful localized burst of energy. It appeared as if the plants had been subjected to an ultra-rapid boiling of their internal moisture, which, upon turning to steam, ruptured the walls of the knot from within. However, the most inexplicable aspect was that the plants themselves were not burned. There were no traces of combustion, no ash, no signs of exposure to high temperatures. The effect was strikingly similar to that of a powerful but ultra-short microwave radiation pulse, and of a non-thermal nature. This was no longer pseudoscience or the speculation of enthusiasts. The results of this research were published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. The leading figure in this field was the American biophysicist Dr. William Levengood, who led a small but dedicated research group, the BLT research team. For decades, he meticulously collected and analyzed thousands of plant and soil samples from hundreds of crop circles around the world, from England to Australia. His findings, confirmed by independent laboratories, were consistent and alarming. Anomalies in plant biology, unexplained elongation and deformation of nodal tissues, strange dehydration, and, most surprisingly, anomalous germination rates of seeds collected within the formations. Some seeds germinated up to 5 times faster than control samples, displaying anomalous vitality, while others, conversely, completely lost their viability, as if they had been sterilized. But the mystery only deepened. Detailed analysis of soil samples taken from the same anomalous circles revealed another inexplicable oddity: the presence of a vast quantity of microscopic metallic spheres, composed primarily of pure iron, often magnetized and sintered into small clusters. These spherules, similar in their chemical composition and morphology to meteorite dust, were virtually absent from control soil samples taken just a few meters outside the formation. Their concentration within the circles was hundreds of times higher than normal. Where did they come from? Were they a byproduct of some unknown technology? Precipitation from the atmosphere caused by the same phenomenon that bent the stalks? Or something entirely different, beyond our understanding? Science, which had so long arrogantly dismissed this phenomenon, was now confronted with solid physical evidence that it could no longer ignore or attribute to pranksters. By 1990, the mystery of the crop circles had ceased to be a rural curiosity and had attracted international attention. What began as an enigma for farmers and enthusiastic researchers was now on the radar of the serious press, academics, and, inevitably, the government and military. That year, Colin Andrews, a qualified electrical engineer and one of the most respected and objective researchers of the phenomenon, spearheaded a bold and unprecedented initiative, Operation Blackbird. The objective was ambitious, yet simple in its essence: to record, in real time, from start to finish, the process of creating a genuine crop circle using the most advanced surveillance equipment of the time. Andrews and his team, with financial and technical support from the BBC and the unofficial cooperation of representatives of the British Army, established a full-fledged surveillance camp in Wiltshire, at the heart of the crop circle hotspot. Powerful spotlights capable of illuminating entire fields, state-of-the-art night vision cameras, sensitive parabolic microphones, radar, and electromagnetic field detectors were installed. Technicians and researchers stood guard around the clock, their eyes glued to the monitors. If something was going to happen, they would record it. But nothing happened. Days turned into weeks. The fields remained untouched. There were no mysterious lights, no nighttime patterns, no anomalous instrument readings. The operation became an expensive media spectacle, and when it produced absolutely no results, the initially intrigued press turned on Andrews in fury. Reporters ridiculed him as a charlatan who had squandered enormous sums of money, time, and resources. Critics and skeptics gloated, declaring that the whole crop circle mystery had been debunked once and for all. simply due to a lack of evidence when close scrutiny began. Andrews, a respected researcher, was publicly humiliated and discredited. But this public humiliation masked something far darker and more sinister, a truth Andrews only dared to reveal years later, fearing for his safety. During the operation, he received alarming information from his confidential sources within the military. It turned out that in the vicinity of the fields under their surveillance, large-scale, unplanned military exercises had suddenly begun. Although the official explanation was vague, a routine equipment check and personnel training, Andrews' sources claimed that new, classified electromagnetic equipment had been deployed in the area, and activity from unidentified aircraft had been observed. On those same nights, when all of Mirlo's equipment was operating at full capacity, personnel recorded strange radar activity and anomalous electromagnetic disturbances, the source of which was located just outside the field. The originally to the designer report within the perimeter of his surveillance, and yet not a single formation appeared in his field of vision. And then something even stranger and more terrifying happened. Shortly after the failed conclusion of the operation, while Andrews was giving an interview at a press conference, an unknown man approached him. He was impeccably dressed, perfectly calm, with a European accent that was difficult to pinpoint. The stranger politely congratulated him on his work, and then directly offered him a very large sum of money in exchange for him completely ceasing all his research in this field. When Andrews categorically refused, the man instantly became cold and curt. He warned him that continuing the research would attract unwanted attention from very serious people, and that his life could become extremely uncomfortable. During the following weeks, Andrews began receiving anonymous phone calls. On the line, there was either total silence or static. His mail was opened, and his house was surveilled. And the most chilling thing, one of his team members, reviewing the archival footage of that same press conference, noticed in the background among the crowd of journalists the same man who had approached Andrews. He wasn't asking questions or holding a camera. He was simply standing behind the press tents, silently watching the team, unblinking. He was never identified. No official agency admitted that this man had any connection to them. Andrews, facing enormous psychological pressure and threats, temporarily withdrew from public life. His reputation in the eyes of the general public was ruined. But for those who worked closely with him, it was crystal clear. He had gotten too close to something he categorically shouldn't have. And although Operation Blackbird officially failed in its primary objective, perhaps unwittingly, it uncovered something far more significant and terrifying. The degree to which the authorities were not only interested in the phenomenon, but possibly silently and actively involved in it, eliminating unwanted researchers, was striking. While Operation Blackbird faded from public memory as a costly curiosity, the mystery itself did not die. It not only continued, but rapidly evolved, reaching a completely new intellectual level. In August 1991, in a secluded field near Cambridge, a formation unlike anything seen before appeared. It was not merely artistic, symbolic, or geometric. It was purely mathematical. It was a near-perfect, photographically accurate representation of the Mandelbrot set, a highly complex fractal figure known in higher mathematics for its infinite, self-replicating structure and its profound connection to chaos theory. The figure appeared with astonishing precision and detail, as if it had been etched by a giant laser printer, not crushed by human feet or primitive tools. For those familiar with this concept, its appearance in a wheat field was a true intellectual shock. The Mandelbrot set is not just a pretty pattern, it is the visual embodiment of highly complex mathematical principles, a recursive order hidden within apparent randomness. Its construction requires an understanding of complex numbers and non-Euclidean geometry. It is not something found by chance in nature, nor can it be easily recreated with boards and string. And yet, there it was, perfectly executed in the wheat, without a single trace of human presence, appearing on a short summer night. The news spread instantly, drawing to the field not only tourists and UFO enthusiasts, but also serious mathematicians, physicists, and programmers. Detailed analysis revealed that the proportions of the formation demonstrated a profound understanding, not only of fractal geometry, but also of key mathematical constants, such as the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio. universal codes that underlie the structure of many life forms, from the shell of a nautilus to the spirals of galaxies. Whoever or whatever the creator was, they weren't simply engaged in land art. They seemed to be transmitting knowledge encoded in the universal language of mathematics, the only language that would be understandable to any sufficiently advanced civilization in the universe. The BBC, in an attempt to demonstrate the possibility of human creation, organized an experiment. A team of professional surveyors and engineers was hired, equipped with the latest technology, GPS navigators, theodolites, laser rangefinders, and specially designed software. Their task was to recreate the Mandelbrot Formation was precisely replicated. Despite all the meticulous preparation and high-tech equipment, the final result, while impressive, fell far short of the elegance and flawlessness of the original. Tiny errors in line thickness, microscopic deviations in symmetry, inevitable human error, all were clearly visible in the aerial photograph. The conclusion was inescapable and extremely unsettling for skeptics. The original design was created with a level of intelligence, precision, and possibly technology inaccessible to ordinary pranksters. Speculation reached a new philosophical level. Was it a form of nonverbal communication? A symbolic message asking, "Do we understand the fundamental laws of the universe as well as you do?" And again, as so often before, the obsessive question of location arose. Why precisely there? This question pushed researchers toward another theory, almost esoteric, yet surprisingly coherent, related to the invisible geography of our planet. As the complexity and mathematical sophistication of crop circles increased, a growing number of independent researchers began to pay attention not only to what was depicted, but also to exactly where it appeared. They began to suspect that the choice of location was as important as the message itself. Armed with maps and GPS coordinates, they began the painstaking work of overlaying hundreds of locations, distortions on maps, of so-called ley lines. This intriguing concept was proposed in the 1920s by the British amateur archaeologist and antiquarian Alfred Watkins. He realized that the major ancient megalithic structures across Britain, stone circles, dolmens, burial mounds, and ancient churches built over pagan worship sites, were not arranged randomly, but aligned along perfectly straight lines he called leys. Initially, Watkins believed they were simply ancient trade routes or sites for astronomical observations. However, his idea was later taken up and developed by esotericists who proposed a much bolder hypothesis. Ley lines are not just geometric constructions, but a kind of energetic meridians of the planet, channels through which invisible telluric currents flow. For decades, mainstream science and archaeology dismissed this idea as pseudoscientific fantasy. But when the exact coordinates of the most complex and anomalous crop circle formations were overlaid on these esoteric maps, the result was astonishing and forced many to reconsider their stance. Around 80% of the most complex, inexplicable, and mathematically precise formations, those with intricate geometry, exhibiting plant anomalies, or accompanied by electromagnetic effects, appeared directly at or near the intersection of known ley lines. The overwhelming majority of these, as already mentioned, were concentrated in Wiltshire, near the world centers of megalithic culture, Stonehenge and Avebury. These sites have long been considered some of the most powerful energy nodes on the planet. Skeptics, of course, did not give up. They argued that it was nothing more than statistical noise and apophenia, the human brain's tendency to see patterns in random data. It was claimed that if enough points are plotted on a map and enough lines are drawn, coincidences are inevitable. But this argument became increasingly unconvincing as the formations began appearing with enviable regularity at sacred and historically significant locations around the world. Glastonbury, the sacred hill of St. Michael, the ancient Ridgeway Path in England, all these places became permanent hotspots. Then similar coincidences began to be recorded abroad, near the famous Nazca lines in Peru, on the Giza Plateau in Egypt, and even on the slopes of the sacred mountain of Machu Picchu in the Andes. The implications of this hypothesis were both unsettling and exciting. Did the creators of these patterns, whoever or whatever they were, choose these special places on the planet on purpose? And if so, to what end? To what end? Did they need this hypothetical terrestrial energy for the very process of creating the formations? Or were they using their creations as giant markers, trying to point out to modern humanity this ancient energy grid, whose existence our distant ancestors perhaps knew perfectly well, and which we, in our technocratic arrogance, have long forgotten? While some researchers studied the cellular structure of plants with microscopes, and others wandered through ancient burial mounds with maps and compasses, a third, and perhaps the most sinister, facet of this multifaceted story began to emerge. In the mid-2000s, British artist and self-proclaimed crop circle creator John Lundberg, one of the most famous pranksters of the 1990s, released a shocking documentary titled Mirage Men. It was a deep, terrifying, and extremely honest dive into the murky world of government disinformation, psychological operations, and their role in shaping the modern culture of UFO research and crop circle mythology. What began as an authorial reflection on art, faith, and mass consciousness quickly became a first-person account of how intelligence services not only observed the phenomenon from the sidelines, but actively infiltrated research communities, manipulating and using them for their own purposes. At the heart of this sinister plot was Richard Doty, a former senior agent with the U.S. Air Force Office of Special Investigations. He fabricated forged but plausible documents, invented incredible stories about extraterrestrial contact, and fed this ingeniously crafted disinformation to credulous, sensation-seeking ufologists. Doty, with a cynical smile, confessed to creating and disseminating numerous skillful hoaxes: fake UFO crash reports, falsified alien autopsy reports, edited video recordings and photographs. The goal of all these operations, which lasted for years and were costly, was one: to muddy the waters as much as possible, to create such dense information noise, such an avalanche of forgeries and contradictory data, that separating real anomalous events from fiction became virtually impossible. He even admitted that his agency was behind the promotion and exaggeration of the famous Roswell crash story, not because it was true, but because it was the perfect psychological operation to divert attention and discredit the entire issue. But why? What were the real motives? They remain unclear. Uses. Some analysts believe that all this massive disinformation was nothing more than an elaborate cover for testing real, secret military projects and aircraft. By wrapping these projects in absurd and ridiculous stories about little green men, they could be absolutely certain that any leak of serious information would be taken seriously by the press or the public. Others believe the objective was much deeper and more psychological: to destabilize and discredit independent researchers, driving them to obsession and paranoia, dividing their communities, so that they might potentially stumble upon something truly important and real. If Richard Doty and his numerous colleagues were willing to go to such lengths to mislead everyone, the main and most terrifying question arises: what were they so meticulously hiding? What truth was so dangerous that it required decades of lies and manipulation to conceal it? The role of John Lundberg himself, the film's director, further complicated and entangled the already complex picture. As one of the most well-known crop circle creators, he honestly admitted that many of the complex and beautiful formations of the 1990s were created by him and his team as part of a large-scale social and artistic experiment. But the more he delved into the subject for his film, the more it seemed to him that he and his fellow artists were merely unwitting pawns in a far larger and more serious game. He spoke of strange moments when he felt watched, when he was subtly and discreetly nudged to choose certain locations for his creations, or to use certain motifs in the patterns, as if someone else, unseen, wanted those specific formations created at that time and place. Could the government have used prank artists as unwitting and blind tools to sow chaos and confusion? Or worse, were they deliberately creating a dense smokescreen of man-made forgeries to conceal the rare, yet genuine and inexplicable phenomena behind them? The film Mirage Men not only shook the foundations of the ufological world, it undermined the very basis of all crop circle research. If disinformation had been sown so deeply and professionally, then even the most obvious facts and evidence became suspect. Witnesses could be manipulated. Real anomalous formations could easily be dismissed as just another hoax, because hoaxes had flooded the information landscape. The question was no longer what is real and what isn't. The question was, who decides what we should believe, and why do they need total control over this story? More than 40 years after this astonishing phenomenon burst into the public consciousness, the truth seems both closer and more elusive than ever. On one side of the scale, we have solid physical evidence that mainstream science still cannot or will not convincingly explain. Anomalies in the cellular structure of plants, microscopic particles of pure iron in the soil, spikes in electromagnetic fields recorded by instruments. On one side, extreme mathematical and geometric precision that points directly to the presence of a high, non-human intelligence. On the other, the candid confessions of hoaxers, the documented facts of a large-scale and cynical disinformation campaign by the very structures that, in theory, should protect the truth. What if all of this isn't contradictory information, but rather pieces of a gigantic and complex picture? What if the anomalous crop circles, rare but real, truly exist, and precisely to conceal their existence, both the operation was launched, for their complete discrediting, and the creation of thousands of beautiful but empty forgeries was tacitly encouraged? What if we are not facing one enigma, but two, one inside the other, like a Matryoshka doll? The first is the origin and nature of the anomalous crop circles themselves. And the second, far more important and alarming, question is who is so desperately and persistently opposed to our finding the answer, and why? Perhaps the key to unraveling the mystery lies not in choosing a single correct theory, but in realizing that we are all witnesses to and participants in a global information war, where simple wheat fields have become a veritable battleground for our perception of reality. The questions remain. Were these patterns a message, a warning, or simply the echo of a natural phenomenon unknown to us, so strange and massive that our minds refuse to accept it? Or perhaps the most important and terrifying circle in the field is that circle of silence and deception with which official structures. What theories have people from all over the world been asking about this great mystery? What do you think? Share your theories and thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much to everyone who watched this episode until the end. Your support with a like and a subscription is crucial for us. And don't forget to click the bell icon to stay up to date with the latest news and never miss our new videos.